Welcome back to another video, guys. I'm very excited to bring you this video. I don't know why. Like, I've been excited to do other stuff to the car, but for some reason making this video I'm super excited to make, just because I know for a fact there is no one else on YouTube that has made a video that's going to be as in-depth as this one is going to be. You guys know when I make how-to and tutorial videos, they are super in-depth. Well, this one is going to be no different. And I also want to just point out that after this video goes out, just pay attention to see who else starts doing their harnesses this way. Some people, they like to send their harnesses out to get reloomed or whatever. Just remember where you saw it first. I'm just going to leave it at that. This video is going to be pretty much taking my stock K20A2 or K-Series engine harness, tearing it all apart and relooming it. But I'm talking relooming it, Raychem, brand new connectors, over the top valve cover routing. We're going to like tuck it. It's going to be a complete overhaul on my engine harness, and it's going to be a way for you guys to see, like, you can do this at home. You don't have to pay anybody to do this for you, and you don't have to buy an expensive engine harness. You know, the way I'm going to show you how to do it, you're going to save money. I think in supplies, I'm up to like $200 just in supplies. That's with the sleeving, brand new connectors, and other little odds and ends that I'm going to show you that I'm going into in this video. You guys don't have to pay anybody to do this. You could do it yourself. I'm going to show you how. I already ripped the engine harness out. You don't have to watch me do that. It's very simple. You know, the engine is bare. We're not focused on that today. Today, well, not today. In this video, we're only focused on how we're going to redo all this. I have all my supplies right here. Like I said, all brand new connectors. Everything is going to get replaced. We have our sleeving right here. We're using Raychem. This is the first time I've used Raychem, so I'm excited to use this. I have a whole bunch of different sizes. That's what it's going to be wrapped in. I'm using Raychem this time because, well, I'm kind of over the braided look. It's been done many times before. Not to say Raychem hasn't been done, but I'm over the braided look. And also Raychem gives you a high, well, not a high, but it's rated for high temperatures. It's flame resistant. So for what I do with the car, it gets hot a lot when I'm racing. The protective features that I'm going to get from the Raychem is pretty much what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more of a higher grade motor spec harness look. That's pretty much what I'm going for. I do want to clarify, this video is going to be a long video. Super in-depth, very long, so just sit down, grab something to eat, grab something to drink, chill out. This is also going to be filmed over a period of days. You know, this is not going to be does not take me one day. This is going to be multiple days. There's a lot of little things you have to do, a lot of steps that I've already kind of cut through already to prepare for this. So let's just jump into it. Here's where we're going to start. The first and most important step in starting to redo all this is labels. So I've already started to label what each connector is, so like you can see that. I put labels on my coil. Oh Jesus, okay. You know, like C3. What's this? This is the crank sensor right here, the crank plug. Label everything before you even start taking things apart. So it's labels and pictures, high quality pictures of one, where the wires go, what's their orientation, the colors of where they go. Take all of that and save all of that, because since you're relooming this, we're not just going to you know, like you can see how trashy this was. This was done many years ago. We're not just going to pull the sleeving over connectors or just depin them and like everything's going to be brand new, so you need to make sure you know where each pin goes, what each color wire goes, where all of that goes. First step you have to do. For me, what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to cut all the zip ties off. I'm going to rip all of this braided loom off of it. We're going to start fresh, because the first thing I want to start with today, at least, is this big block right here. Most of you guys know on the K-Series harness, well, on the A2 harness, I think it's most K-Series A harnesses, but like I think like the Z harnesses are different. They have this block. It's kind of like it goes right here somewhere on your engine. Long time ago, I relocated that. So normally it would have been like right here, where the T branch is, where this goes over your your valve cover for your coils. They would normally have it right here. The way I did it many years ago, and I'm going to redo it today, is I just cut each wire individually. That's what all these red wires are. And I just extended it. And here's our grommet that goes into the firewall, or a little clamshell. And I just kept it behind the dash so you would never see it. It worked, no problems, but it made it very bulky. I used the wrong gauge wire. I just did it very messy. So I'm going to take all of this loom off, cut each wire one at a time, use the correct gauge wire to make it a little thinner so that way we don't have this big bulk of wires right here, and just do it a little bit. So after the long, painstaking process of actually removing all of the loom off our harness, I split it so you can see what I was talking about with this little block right here that we have hidden in the back. This is all the wires that I had to extend or add in order to extend this block all the way back here. There's a lot of mess going on here. I think I just kind of did it by eyeball. I just ran wire and I didn't do it a nice way. I'm just going over this so many years ago. This was like 5 or 6 years ago I did this. I could definitely tell where my work is improved to today's standard, but here's the thickness of the OEM harness. It's a lot thinner. This is almost the same thickness as that, but this is just thicker wire. So what we're going to be doing, literally all you're going to do is just start cutting one wire at a time, and I'm going to go about this video kind of like if you guys are following through, you know, like follow me step by step if you're doing this right now. So now that we took everything off, we're going to do one wire at a time. So the way I did it was I started actually from this little block, and I just pick one, cut it, and then I would trace to wherever it ended up on the harness. So some of them actually go to like some sensors. So as you can see, I extended this one, and this one was what, our reverse? Yeah, reverse lockout. I put our lock. So we're just going to start that way. Start from your block, one wire at a time, extend it, and just go that way. Don't worry about how your harness is laid out right now. We're not worried about trying to lay it out a certain way. And you want pretty much every piece of tape and loom removed from all the wiring, because we're going to redo. Some of them I'm keeping it just to keep it bundled together. But all of this tape is going to get removed because we're going to be rerouting this harness. The way we're going to do this, how we're going to extend the wires. Back then, I soldered them and heat shrunk them. We're not doing that. I'm not a fan of soldering anymore. Soldering just makes the joint too stiff. There's no movement in it. Vibrations can actually crack the solder, and there's too many failure points with it. The way we're going to do it is we're going to be using open barrel splices. So I'm not sure if you guys have ever used these. All they are is pretty much how they're we'll pick a bigger one just so you can get a better example. You put the two pieces of wire inside it, and then you crimp it. Crimping is a much more professional way and better way to do any kind of wiring repairs or anything like that. Some people don't believe in it. I believe in it, and another reason why you should crimp over solder is, well, this is what the OEM does. So in your harnesses, there's always what they call branches and breakouts. I have an OEM breakout right here. Now this is not anything that I did. I just moved it over. As you can see, the OEM manufacturer actually uses open barrel crimps to join one wire and split them into two. I'm going to be redoing this one just because the tape actually came off of it, and it's just too exposed. I'm going to redo that. But if the OEM does it and people tell you open barrel crimps or just crimps in general are better than soldering, I mean, there should be no argument over it. But of course, everybody does everything their own way. This was back then. Now we're going to use these. I'm going to show you the tools, and I'll do one wire. We'll extend it. Oh, I'd even say we're going to be going to an 18 gauge wire. I think I used like a 14 or a 16 back then. I'm not sure. We're going to 18 gauge. That's what the OEM is. So let me show you how we're going to do one of these. So to get started, we're just going to pick one wire. I've already removed all the tape for our old wiring. So we're going to start with this one. All we're going to do is cut it back. So So remember, this is going to be one of the wires that we have to trace to our block. So we'll keep this one to the side. I'll keep this on here so I know this is where I'm working. So now we've found our other end, which is right here. Let me fix the camera. So we found our end. Is this guy right here. What I'm going to do is, because this wasn't too bad bunched up, I'm just going to make it the same length. So we're going to cut it off right here. Okay, so now we got that guy. So this is no more. We're going to start on one end right here. So we're just going to strip this. And then we're going to strip our new wire. I'm going to be using heat shrink on all of this. The way I do it is the way I do it. You guys could do it separately. You are going to need one of these special kind of crimpers. For the crimpers, the open barrel splices, you can find all of this is going to be on my Amazon link. I'll leave that in the description below. So normally how people would do it is they would actually put the open barrel crimp in the crimpers, crimp them that way. The way I do it is I'm actually going to twist the wires together, kind of like if I was going to solder them, and then crimp the open barrel splice in between them and have the shrink wrap over it, and that's it. So hopefully you guys can see that. There's our open barrel crimp. It's like a B-style crimp that they call it when you crimp it down. It's nice and snug. So now what we're going to do is going to run this wire, extend it, and run our shrink wrap over this, just like that. And that's it. That's all you got to do. We'll extend that wire all the way. Do the same crimp on this end, and then do it another 20 times. I'll show you after I crimp both ends. This is the first one we did with the shrink wrap on it. Looks all good. Then we ran our wire pretty much the same length as the old red wire that we took off. Here's our second crimp. As you can see, it looks just like the one we were looking at earlier, if it'll focus. There you go. It's crimped nice and tight. Run our shrink wrap over it again. Heat that up, and then that's it. We got to do that for all these other red wires and make them smaller gauge. This is the time-consuming part of this whole job, is relocating this block, because without relocating it, it's a lot harder to try to run your, whether it's going to be braided loom or what we're going to use the Raychem. It's just in the way. So doing this is going to take you hours, literally hours, to make sure you can get it all done right, and then moving on to the next step. I said I'm using 18 gauge. I'm looking at it. I could probably actually use a 20 gauge. This 18 gauge looks a little too thick still. I'm probably going to switch to a 20 gauge. So I'm going to go out, get some 20 gauge, and then I'll show you guys when all the wires are extended, and then we're going to move to the next step. Alright, so I got a few hours into this already. I'm nowhere near done extending these wires, but I want to show you a different way that I'm going to do it this time, to group a few of them to use less wires throughout the harness. So for some of my connectors, I've already started to run my black wires. You can see I've been kind of looming it in between the harness every time I keep extending it, just to try to keep it a little tighter. I did end up going out and buying 20 gauge wire. I'm not using the 18 anymore, so I did drop down to the 20. It fits better, and it's a little thinner, so that's going to work out. As you can see, I did open up the junction box over here just to try to, if I had to depin some of them, just so I can kind of untangle it, because this was, I mean, and again, I don't know why. This was so long ago. It's really messy, so I'm just trying to do it a little nicer now. I'm pretty sure where this tape stopped right here is going to be already inside the cabin. Actually, yeah, that's actually deeper in there, so we're looking at maybe around right here is where the firewall grommet would be. So from here, we'll say, and on out is where the heat shrink is going to go. But what I really wanted to show you guys was I did all these individually, and you can see we have some groups here. We have 4 wires. Well, there's more than 4 wires that have the yellow with the black stripe, but these 4 in particular are for my injectors. So what I'm going to end up doing instead of using 4 wires and running another 4 wires through the harness, which is going to just increase the thickness on this, I'm going to cut all these 4 down. I'm going to splice them to one single wire. So it's going to go from these 4 to 1 wire. So instead of using the 20 gauge, I'm going to use like a 14 gauge wire. So 4 to 1. So that way I'm just running 1 wire down. Then when I get to about here, I'm going to split it to 4 again. And I'm going to connect it to the cord. It's not necessary to go to the exact wire. I don't believe so. As you can see, this is all just a junction right here. It's not like it's going to one specific spot here. It's here where they matter where they go, because they're going to different connectors. But on this end, you should be all right. I'm going to be the test dummy for you guys. So, you know, obviously when this is all done, we're going to turn the car on and we're going to let you know that it works. But it's going to go from 4 to 1 wire, and then from the 1 back to 4 to connect to the rest. And we'll know which ones we need to go to, because once we cut all these off, we're going to just follow it and see which ones they go to. I have another group of brown with a yellow stripe here. With these, I was thinking about doing the same thing. I might not, because I know 2, well actually no, I lied, I will, because there's 2 that go to the ground that goes on top of the valve cover. As you can see, they're right in here, the brown with the yellow. So I'm gonna verify which one those are. I'm gonna pair them up, so it might be just 2 wires to 1, so it might be 2 20 gauge to 1 18 gauge, something like that. And then this third one here, it goes up to our connector where we run our where we connect our charge harness for the alternator and the starter and all that. I'll run that one single, but just so you guys know, when you have groups like this, so specifically we'll talk about the fuel injector ones, we're going to group them together, less wires running throughout the whole harness, and then I'll show you when it's all. So after literally about 3 hours of cutting and extending wires, there is our old mess. There is all of our old loom. Here's where we're at now. As you can see, everything has been extended. I had to use some red because I ran out of black 20 gauge. Everything is extended over here with the open barrel crimps, shrink wrapped. Now, this is still kind of, as you can see, there's still kind of like a little loop here in the original harness layout where the coils would run over. I don't know if you guys can kind of see it. So this is running this way. This runs to, what else we got over here? Map sensors and stuff like that. Our coils and our VTEC connectors and everything would still run over the valve cover. So the next step, what we need to do now is pretty much, this is not finalized. We're still going to map out our own layout. So we're going to take the harness and we're going to lay it over the valve cover. Pretty much, we're just going to try to make this all go one way. So I'm going to lay everything out like that. I might start depinning connectors so I could get rid of this loop and have everything just go straight and not loop over. And then once everything is laid out, we're going to actually be doing more cutting, because the way this harness is laid out, it's meant to I think I remember the OEM was like run through the back and then up over the valve cover and down. Well, the way we're going to do it is we're actually coming out of the firewall straight to the valve cover. Instead of running the back loop up, we're coming firewall over the valve cover, which would be firewall to the valve cover. So we're already, let's say valve covers around this section. Our coil plugs are all the way here. So we're going to do a lot of cutting. We're going to undo all of this, which is very easy. I'll show you guys how to depin them from here. We'll just spin them out one by one. And we're going to have to pretty much be making all new connectors or all new branches a lot closer to the firewall, because that's where we're going to be starting. So that's going to be tomorrow. All right, it's a new day. I got some rest. I'm pretty sure I ended that last clip probably looking kind of tired and not explaining correctly the way or what I wanted to explain. So I laid the harness back into the engine bay to give you a better idea of what I mean by now we're going to pretty much start shortening wires. So because we're going for an over the valve cover routing, as you can see, all the extra harness is just laid over this way, because originally the harness would run back here and then tee upwards. So all this extra wiring actually was supposed to come around this way and then come over this way to get our coils and stuff. So because we're doing an over the valve cover routing, we're actually going to have to be pulling a lot back. So like this connector right here, this is C4. So this is the coil number 4, which needs to be here. Which actually is not in a bad spot. I could probably leave it there. But believe it or not, coil number 1 is all the way over here. It's just all the way down here. We have all this extra wiring. So this is where it's going to, this is your planning stage now. So we've already extended what we needed to extend. Now we have to plan this out, and we might actually have to undo a lot of our extended wires, just because we're going to have to come into the actual main harness, pull some of our wires for like our coils, pull them back, and then cut them to shorten them to where they need to go here. And this is where a lot of the time is going to come into as well. A lot of people get intimidated when they see all of this. If you just do one connector at a time, it's not that bad. So in this stage, we're going to be pulling each connector individually to where it needs to go, figuring out where it is. And it might sound counterintuitive, but like some of the wires that we had to extend were like ground wires for some of the sensors. We might have to cut those again, because if we're shortening the sensor, we're not just going to leave that one. So it's a lot of time to do this, but you're going to run it and route it the way you want. I think that, you know, there's something to say about that. Like, you did it, you know, and it's going to look the way you want. And so if you got the time, I think this is pretty cool. So let's figure out how we're going to be doing this right now. All right, so you guys are due for an update. From that last clip you saw, the crazy mess of wiring, to what it looks like now. I pretty much have my my layout made. It's not, this is just the second step of what I'm doing. This is not even close to being what it's going to finally look like, but the layout is there. So I ended up removing my intake manifold so I can really start tucking nicely underneath it. I don't want to have like bunched up wires like how I used to just bunch them up and kind of hide them behind the starter. I want it to be terminated to where they need to be. I don't want to bunch nothing up. So here's our over the top valve cover routing. As you can see, I used a lot of these twist strips, whatever you want to call them, twist ties. There we go. To kind of hold things the way I want them to be. So coming out of the firewall, we start coming up. I put a zip tie here because this is going to be the beginning of my first branch, and from there I have a whole bunch of wires coming down. So going down is going to be our VTEC, our oil pressure, our crank sensor, all of that. That's already running down, and I had to feed a lot of wiring back this way to run it down. Then obviously we have our coils plugged in, so they're going to have just a little bit of slack coming out there. The top black wires are the wires that I had to run backwards to go back to our junction box, which I disconnected at the moment because I don't need it there. Then we start, well, I'm going to have to move the manifold. So with the manifold out of the way, then we start running down. We have our 2 cam sensors plugged in. Also our engine coolant temp sensors plugged in right here. Speed sensor, the reverse lockout, the reverse lights. All this is kind of ran loosely just so I know where it's going to go. Again, more twist ties here just to kind of keep my branches together. Then we come down under the radiator hose. We have another twist tie about right there. And then I use this little spot right here. Usually there's a stud here if you have the original heater hoses. I took the stud out, put a bolt in there so I could use one of these cushion clamps to keep it together as well. And now what's where we're at is our IAT sensor. I'm still going to get the length for that. Our valve cover ground, so that's going to run up here. And then all of our injectors, they're all of this stuff is way too long. So this is why I'm saying this is still only a step 2. Because I'm just laying it out. Step 3 is going to actually be cutting wires to length. Because I'm giving it a whole new routing now, as you can see, a lot of these wires have way more slack than I need. Good example actually I could show you is like the VTC sensor on the side of the timing cover. So we have our VTC sensor here, which again used to run backwards, then up the valve cover, and then back. Because I'm not doing that, I'm just running it from there, from the ECU connector straight here. This is all the extra wiring for the VTC. So it's going to be a lot I'm chopping off. That way it's just going to run from here loop, and then connect. So that's going to be the next step. Once I finalize how I want the routing to be, so I still have to do the injectors and stuff. Once all of that is finalized, because we have new connectors, new pins, everything is brand new, I'm just cutting connectors right off, labeling them obviously so I know which way they go, and I took all the pictures to know where what the orientation is for each wire. So like for this, with the tab up, I know green on the left, red on the right. I have all the pictures so that when I start to terminate the pins, they're all going to go back together. So there's a few sensors that I'm not using that you guys might still have on your harness. First one that I'm not using anymore is obviously going to be my IAC connector. I don't have an IAC on here. I have it blocked off. So for this, one of the black wire goes to our valve cover ground. What I'm just going to end up doing is just chopping this black wire off. I don't need it anymore. The other two pins right here, I'm actually going to depin it off the connector and pull it all the way back through the harness. I might chop it near the ECU connector in case I ever need it again. I still have it there. The other connector that I got rid of, which is why I still have this wire hanging here because I chopped it off at this box, is the evap, the purge solenoid that's usually on top of the throttle body. If you have OEM, when you have like a purge solenoid right up here, I haven't used that in so long. I don't need it anymore. I actually cut the wire itself, and so that's what this free wire is right here. This was the purge valve power wire. Don't need that anymore. I'm going to run that near the connectors as well in case I ever need it for some odd reason. I doubt it. The wire is still there and it's still terminated onto the ECU. So I just wanted to give you an update of where I'm at now. I'm going to finish making my layout, and then we're going to start cutting the harness and start terminating. Well, we might terminate pins. We're not putting connectors on yet. That's like the final thing. Since the harness is now mapped out to where we want it to be, I went ahead and pretty much twisted the back end of our harness. So as you can see, it's all got a tight twist on it. All I did was pretty much use a zip tie at my branch point right here, which is over the valve cover this way. Held that tight, and then I just pretty much gave the whole back end a tight twist. And you can see now where our new junction box is sitting. It's going to be inside where near the ECU is, out of the way. And the way I'm holding this twist is with something called Captain tape. This is what they call Captain tape. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about it before. Basically, this tape is used for I don't want to say motorsport grade wiring, but it has a high heat resistance and it doesn't leave a sticky residue like electrical tape. It may sound really silly to say, but when you're kind of really getting into motorsport wiring, you don't use electrical tape. Electrical tape is like a big no-no because it's not as high of heat resistant as Kapton tape is, and also it doesn't leave that sticky residue like I just said. Electrical tape, I'm just dealing with it right now, taking all this electrical tape off. It's just leaving all that sticky residue, and it just, you don't use electrical tape when you're doing motorsport grade wiring, we'll say. I'm not considering this motorsport grade wiring. I'm just trying to get it to that level, because if you're going to do motorsport grade wiring, you need what's called Tefsel tape. I think I said that right. Not Tefsel tape, Tefsel wire, and that is a higher standard of wire that again has high heat resistance property, low resistance, and that's the proper way if you're doing a wiring harness from scratch. So with this Kapton tape right now, what I'm going to do is pretty much start twisting my harness up and getting rid of all my twist ties. So the tape is going to be holding it the way I want. I'm not cutting any wires yet. That's first we need it to hold this routing that we have. So the tape we're going to do, we're just going to be spinning the tape all around it, getting it that way. Once we are done with that, we're going to put the harness back on the engine, plug everything up, and then we're going to start shortening wires. So at this point, the harness is finally taking its final shape. It's over the valve cover routing, as you can see. It comes right out of the firewall. We could give this a little more slack if we wanted to, so we could pull it out a little bit more, give that a little bit more slack. We've got our Kapton tape wrapped all the way around, kept everything nice and tight. On the parts where, I'll go over it like this. I put zip ties at each one of my branches. If I haven't really explained it earlier in this video, because I can't even remember, this is so many days I'm working on this. A branch is where you have technically a branch breaking out from the harness that we're going to be running to other sensors. So everywhere I have a zip tie,
I have a branch coming out. So for here, it's going to be like my cam sensors, coolant temp, and all the sensors for the trans. Coming down a little bit more, I have another black zip tie here. This is another branch. So this is going to be our injectors, our MAP, our TPS. I also have one more branch up top here as soon as we get started. So this white zip tie, this is going to be our VTEC, our oil pressure, all of that. I'm leaving the zip ties on for now because I want to know at each branch when we put our heat shrink on, we're going to be stopping at the branch. So initially when we start, we're going to slide heat shrink from the bottom. So we're going to lay this all out once all of our connectors are cut off. We're going to slide the heat shrink from here all the way up through the harness, all the way to the ECU connectors, and then I would cut the heat shrink at this first zip tie right here, essentially my first branch, because I can't have the heat shrink go over these right here. So the heat shrink is going to come up to here, cut it, shrink it. We're going to have another piece of heat shrink come up to this zip tie as well, shrink it here. Then these are going to be separate, and then since these connectors will be cut off, we'll have another piece of heat shrink coming up, shrink it here, and then we'll have one more little piece, maybe like a 2-inch piece or something like that. It'll be like this. That's going to go over all the overlaps. This is going to kind of tuck in this way, and then that's where this branch is coming out. You're obviously going to see all that when we get to this point. So I just wanted to show you guys. I use zip ties to kind of keep my branches separate. And yeah, this is our final shape. So you can see it's a lot neater from what it was when we started all this. Now what's next is put it back the way I need it, because once we lay everything out the way we want, obviously we don't need this much for like what, coil number 2. We don't need this much wire, so I'm gonna get it to where I want it, give it a little extra. I'd probably chop it right here. We don't need this little bit, like an inch of wire right here. Chop it right there so this can sit back. It'll kind of be tucked in like that. Now we're gonna start cutting wires. So I'm gonna lay all this back down, and we're gonna really get to the point where once we cut all these connectors off, we get our lengths, then we're going to start throwing the Raychem all over the whole harness. All right, and there we have it. After cutting every wire off, they're pretty much ran to where they need to go. I just kind of like pushed them into the connectors a little. Well, they were coming out, but yeah, like the engine coolant temp, I just kind of had it pushed it in there to get an idea what that's going to look like. Here's our intake cam, yeah, intake cam sensor, the injectors, the cable, the harness is pulled up. I have one underneath for the map sensor, wherever, oh, that one came out, but it was right here. So our harness is laid out. It's cut to length. If you guys wanted to see this back right here, like our VTC, I don't know if you remember how long this was. Now it's such a short path, it just runs right to the VTC, and everything else is pretty much labeled. And label. At this point, you have to label every connector you're cutting off, because you need to know where the wires are going to go. They look kind of messy right now. That's just because they're not tied up. But now what we need to do is take the whole harness off of the car again. We need to clear this whole table off, because now we're going to start running the shrink wrap on it. And for these, like this is my IAT, for these single branch offs, so not this main bulk, but the branch offs now, so every little branch off, what I'm going to end up doing, probably, I might change my mind midway, but I'm just going to grab the wires and twist them, make them nice and tight. Then I'm not going to put the pins on them yet. Slide our heat shrink and leave it like that. But yeah, so now it's a lot of on and off, but to me, this looks rewarding. You know, I really like how tight this is going to come right here. I might put another cushion clamp off of this bolt to keep this harness tucked tighter. I might even put it behind the fuel hose. There's options, but alright, I got to clear all this. And these connectors, I'm only replacing them just because I felt like it. I didn't have to replace them, but I'm keeping all these connectors. I'm going to depin all the wires out of them, save them all, and yeah, let's clear all this off and really start making it look pretty now. I went ahead and I did one wire for you, or one sensor cable for you guys, just so you can get the idea and the vision of how this is pretty much going to look. So here, as you can see, I ended up twisting the wires. I like the way this looks. This is our, I got a light, the glare. This is our VTC harness right here, twisted with our Raychem, and then with a label maker, put the VTC, the clear shrink wrap, And then we leave about maybe 1.5 to 2 inches exposed, because we still need to slide the connector over this. So we don't want this shrink wrap all the way to the top. You want some exposed, and you don't want it twisted, so that way they're not too tight when they go into our connector. But this is a preview of what you guys can get. This looks like something you would order from a tucked harness. I'm going to show you every step of how we got to that. So I'm going to choose another cable. Maybe we'll do this one. This is our crank. So I'll do the crank next. This is a nice long section. Get this to look like that. So to get started, like I said, we're going to do our crank crank wires right now. So we're just going to take our label off because we know this is going to be crank. And then you're going to stretch this out and make sure these cables or these wires are pretty much the same length. So they're very close. If not, all we're going to do is just trim them down a little bit to make them even. Okay, so now they're even. If you go a little bit more. That's just going to make installing the pins into the connectors that much easier, that much cleaner. You're not going to have one wire that's a little too long and then it's going to like bunch up kind of like that or something. It just, you want them to be as even as possible. So now, alright, we're very close. Now we need to choose heat shrink sizes. So for the 2-wire, I found the tightest one that would slip over and then also shrink very tight. We used a 1/8 inch heat shrink. I'm going to try, I have the 1/8 right here. I'm going to try to slip it over to 3. It might be a little too tight, and if it's too tight, we'll switch to a bigger size. So let's see if 1/8 will be good. So 1/8 is actually rolling over it very nicely. I'm going to use 1/8 on this one as well. Before we actually slide this over though, I'm going to show you guys how to do this. You might already know how to twist it. If you don't, I'll give you a quick example. You're going to be using a power drill. So what you're going to do is you're going to actually, I might have to move the camera around, but you're going to get this pulled out, and then you're going to put the ends inside your power drill, just like this. You're going to want to go in about 1 inch. That's kind of how I had this much exposed, was because you're just going to go into a good amount where you don't want it to twist, because you don't want to twist the ends. You always want them straight. So let's readjust, and I'm going to show you kind of the speed and how much twist you want out of it. I have a little tension on our harness right now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start feeding this in, and you're going to chuck it by hand first. So we'll get that started about 1 inch. And make sure when you chuck it, it's actually in the middle and it's not being pinched by the ends of the drill. Alright, so that's pretty much, and don't chuck it too tight. These are just wires. Now you're going to hold this across, give it a little bit of tension, and run the drill very slowly. It doesn't really matter which way you're going to spin either. And you got to keep tension on the harness. And then you're just going to go. Now we're going to go a little bit more. And that should be pretty much what we're looking for right there. Now with this, you're going to have to hold the end. So we're going to put our harness down, release the chuck. And if it was tight enough, it won't unwind. It might unwind at the end, pretty much at the very tip. And it looks like we could go a little bit tighter. So you see, it's going to unwind, but it went a little too much for what I like. So we're going to put it right back in, get it a little tighter. Alright, that should be good. Okay, so you see it unwind it a little bit again. But it still kept the twist effect, or the twist that you're looking for. And now the other thing about when you twist these cables, they become very easy to move around, very flexible, and they'll hold their twist. So now what we're going to do is throw our heat shrink over this.
And again, you're going to want to measure your heat shrink to leave about, we're going to say, an inch from the tip of the wire down. When you leave about an inch and then you shrink it, it's going to come down a little bit more, because once the heat shrink shrinks, it's going to actually come a little lower. So give yourself a little bit less. Give yourself like half an inch, because once you shrink it down, it's going to shrink tighter. So we're just going to run this about here, and I'm going to cut it to about right there. Then we're just going to feed this through. Now, because this is 3 wires, this is going to be a little tighter than when I did the 2, but I want it to be nice and tight. Our heat shrink is all pushed down. Our harness, you can see, hopefully the camera will pick it up. I pretty much went as far as I could up to where a little tape separation was, and then what I was left with was about that much wire exposed. I'm not too worried about it. Once I shrink it, this will actually come down a little bit. I'm actually going to push this down a little bit more because I see I got a little bit more room. And that actually gave us a little bit more up top, which is going to be perfect. Now, Raychem, heating it up. You guys can use a traditional heat gun. One thing that I was taught about Raychem, and I tried it myself because I've done it with a heat gun, and then now the way I do it is with propane. Because of the heat rating of Raychem, it's so high. The heat gun, depending on what heat gun you use, if you have a high quality heat gun, you could probably get enough heat to shrink this down in a good time. I use a normal $25 heat gun, and it takes a while to heat this up to shrink it. Propane, it'll take you about 30 seconds, and it shrinks it very nicely. That's the way to go. That's the way I'm going to go. So we'll see how long this takes. So I wasn't counting how long that took, but this is pretty much where we want it to be. As you can see the twist through the heat shrink. I'm going to do this end right now. Actually, I could do it while it's sitting up here because I don't want to burn my table. And then with the propane, you're done a lot quicker, and our Raychem is on. As you can see now, we have a little bit more wire exposed at the end. I still have to trim these a little bit, but it's not going to be much. And now this Raychem is pretty much cool to the touch. It doesn't hold heat like a normal heat shrink does when you're putting that much heat into it. So we have our Raychem on. I'm going to show you how to put your label on. How I make my labels is I use this P-Touch Edge label maker. I literally bought this at Home Depot. You guys can find this in the electrical section at Home Depot. It's one of the most basic ones, but you can make it work. And then we use a, let's see if the camera will pick it up right there. We just use a yellow heat shrink pack, and that is the size that I'm using. And I have found that this .34, so it's a little bigger than a 1/4 inch, or 8.8 mil, works perfectly for these small wires. So it shrinks on there very nicely. Here's a little sample of what it looks like. So all we're gonna do is put this. There's no modification. I know sometimes people have to modify these to make them fit, because this is not supposed to go into this one, but this one doesn't need any modification. It goes right in. Like I said, the label maker, Home Depot. The labels, I'll leave a link in the description to my Amazon store, and you can buy the same ones that will work in this Brother P-Touch Edge. So now, I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to make this. This was for our crank, so I'm going to put crank on here. So all I'm going to put is CRK. That's just an abbreviation that I know that I can use. And then we're going to get our clear heat shrink, which we're going to use a 1/4 inch heat shrink. Same way, slide it on, shrink it, heat it up, then put the clear shrink, slide it on, shrink it, and that is how you're going to get this product. There you go. You just pretty much saw I made it, cut it, and then just heated it on with the clear heat shrink to protect it, and that way it won't pretty much fade over time. But there's our crank wires right there, all done. The only bad thing about this, I'll say, is it wastes too much heat shrink. So it printed that much, and then I had to cut the rest off. I'm going to have to keep playing with the settings in my label maker. And that's why you can see I pretty much have almost identically the same size that I had to cut off. But that's it. So now we're going to work on every other cable and wire that we have here to make them look just like how we did these two right here. And then we're going to put this whole harness together. So after a few hours of trying to go through each individual wire or each individual sensor wire, I'm going to show you guys where I'm at. Been about an hour and a half, 2 hours, but unfortunately I pretty much out of 1/8 inch Raychem, and I still need to do a few more, like the fuel injector wires. Still need to do those, and actually that might be it, and then another set of wires. But I'm out of 1/8, so I'm going to show you where we're at and what I'm going to do next until I have to order more. So this branch of wires are pretty much all done. We have our reverse lock, our VSS, what's this? Engine coolant temp. Our coils are done. We have all of the like VTEC and crank one and crank sensor VTC. That's all done. Like I said, the only thing that's left are my fuel injectors, and then this bunch of wires right here, which connects to the connector that will go to the jumper underneath that would go to your alternator harness and your knock sensor, because those are not knock sensor, alternator, and there's one, I think there's one more. No, that might be a knock sensor and alternator. On the base model, you have the runners for your intake manifold. That's part of that little jumper as well. But for this is just those two, and then our starter is separate. But I was able to do the starter one right here, so then we'll just put a connector on that to connect to the other jumper. But this is as far as I can get right now. I'm going to have to order 1/8. But before I pretty much call it for today, I'm going to start running the body or the Raychem for the body of the harness. So we're going to go up to about right here, which is where our ECU connectors are. Then we're going to come all the way to this section right here. So this is going to be one section. The way we're going to do that, I haven't decided what size I'm going to use. It's either going to be 3/4 or it's going to be 1 inch. You just bunch everything up, slide it all the way over, then you get this section, bunch that up, slide it all. You're just going to slide it all the way up until we get to this section right here. So let's do that and figure out what size we're going to use. I kind of got carried away and started to pretty much add loom, or not loom, add the Raychem throughout the whole harness, and I just decided to pick the camera up now because I'm at my stopping point for today since I have to order more. So let's pretty much go over what we were using so far. From my ECU connectors, pretty much back here, from here all the way to our first branch out, which was our VTEC and all of that, I ended up using 1 inch. So as you can see, it says right here Raychem 1. Usually the number after Raychem is the size of the Raychem. I don't know if I explained that. So I used 1 inch from here to here. It just kind of slid over everything the easiest. But then
After our VTEC and crank branch, I used here Raychem 3/4 inch. So I used 3/4 inch for the rest of the branches, or the rest of the body of the harness up until the very end, because I don't need any more of that 3/4. All of this is going to be its own separate loom, individual loomed cables, or loomed wires. And yeah, so as you can see, there's little gaps here. That's all intentional, especially at the branch points. This is all intentional. You always leave those for last, because what we're going to do now is cut little sections, and what's going to happen is the little sections are going to go over the branches and the little openings, and it's just going to pretty much slide over this way. So these are going to be kind of tucked down like this. So our shrink wrap is going to pretty much go up to here. It's going to hold this tight, and it's going to hide this section, and that's how you cover breaks like that. And for this right here, this branch is going to be tucked or held tight against here, and then the shrink wrap, the little section, like a 1.5 inch section, is going to go up to about right here. And it makes more sense when you see me do it. And then that's going to be it. The last thing is going to be adding new pins to our wires to actually make them connectors. And then I threw the OEM grommet for the firewall back on. As you can see, I had to slice this, but I sliced this years ago when I first loomed my harness. I have searched high and low to try to find a replacement grommet. I could not. Somebody actually tried to help me find one. They ended up sending me the wrong part. I don't know if this is even a thing anymore that the OEM manufacturer makes. If anybody knows a part number just for the rubber, I don't need the plastic clamshell, because I actually have the clamshell brand new. You can see there's one half of it right here. I have this new. He was able to source this for me, but I cannot find this rubber grommet. I'm just going to end up reusing it. That's why it is on here now, because once we put connectors on, I'm assuming you guys understand why we don't put the connectors on. We don't put connectors on until we're pretty much done with the harness, because we need to slide all of our shrink wrap over to the end, and then obviously this is going to be slid over as well. It's so much easier, if not almost impossible, with connectors on it. So that's why connectors are always last. So this, I'm going to put it on, put heat shrink over this end right here, so it'll hide the cut and keep it pretty much tight. But I can't do that until it is back in the car, because I'm going to have to see what, where am I going to pretty much put this? Is it going to be back here? Do I have to slide this here? Not sure yet, so that's going to be at the very end. But I'm going to slide some heat shrink on it and just leave it with that just floating on the harness. That way, once I get my my positioning on there, we'll just heat it up, and that's going to be permanent. Our extra Raychem finally showed up, so I was able to do all of the fuel injector wires and the few wires that were running to the jumper for the alternator connector, since on the stock Type S harness you have the alternator and starter. Not sure if I explained this already on a separate harness. Anyway, we're almost done with this harness. All right, there's one more step that I'm going to do to try to clean it up a little bit better. So before I get too deep into it, I wanted to show you guys and give you a part number on what it is. That last step is going to be our two brakes. So I don't know if you guys remember where our harness would break out or branch out to, for example, this is our ECT. So this was like for our coolant temp. So this was on the side of our head, which would be right here. What would you do in this instance when you have the two shrink wrap pretty much butt to each other, but they can't seal because of the little branch right here? Normally, what I was thinking of doing was just adding a little piece in the middle right here, kind of how you saw, just to leave the break or the branches out like that. People do that all the time. It's clean. I didn't do it, but they'll actually run a little bit of epoxy in between the seams right here of the shrink wrap. That's like what the real top wire harness manufacturers do to really seal that tight. So again, I thought about doing it here. I wanted to try something different, so what I ended up doing was buying these heat shrink boots right here. Here's your part number, 342A024. This boot is going to be kind of like a Y, so when it shrinks down to size, this little arm is going to kick out a little bit, and then all of these branches are going to be in the one section, and then the main section of the harness is in here. I already slipped it over this side. It is a tight fit. It kind of knurled the heat shrink over a little bit. I'll just heat it up again to try to get it back to size. But here you can see kind of what it's going to look like. So once this all shrinks down to size, this section is just going to stick out. I think it's going to look really nice. It's going to look a little more proper than just, you know, putting a piece of heat shrink like a lot of people do just right here to keep them all tied up. Because I have such a bundle right here, so this is the fuel injectors and the ground and everything, it is a straight shot. It's not like these are split in one way or another. I didn't feel like using one of those boots here. So for me, this was fine here. But in these two sections right here, I wanted to use these boots. And yeah, I'm going to heat these up. I've done this before with these boots. They take a lot of heat. So I'm going to see how long it takes to heat these up. Well, first, I'm having trouble with this section right here. This one might be a little tighter than that one right here. So I'm having to try to open up this little opening a little bit more so I can slide the rest in, slide this all the way up. Then we'll start heating it up and see how it looks. Hopefully it looks nice. I've never used this boot on this harness before. After applying a lot of heat, I'm talking a lot. I'm not sure if on camera you can tell how much heat I was actually putting with the propane torch, but this is it's starting to mold to its shape now, so you want to be careful not to hold too much heat on it, because even though these require a lot of heat, you could still burn through them and leave burn marks. So I got it burnt a little bit, but then I just would move away with the heat, let it cool off, come back to it to try to let it reform again, and it worked to get rid of some of the burn marks. But at this point, you can kind of see how I have it laid out. You need to let them cool, because if you touch them, you can put like fingerprint marks on them, or you can still kind of distort it while they're trying to dry. And so here's the little Y section I was talking about. So the wires or the cables are just going to hang out on this side right here. What I had to end up doing, because it was so tight for this section near the head, the vehicle speed and the reverse lockout, I just ran them out of the larger loop. So you can kind of see it just come, well, I'll move the camera to this side. You can kind of see they just come out of the back section here, as opposed to coming out of the Y portion. So that'll work fine. This is the section behind the head, so our VTEC and our crank signal and all of that came out of here. They all, for some reason, fit through this hole. Could just be a little manufacturer defect that this one was a little tighter, because this is the same 5 wires that, or it would have been 5 wires coming out, just like how I have 5 here. But regardless, I'm just going to let this cool off now, and we're at the point where we're completely, if you want to say, loomed up. There's nothing else to loom. I went ahead and I already kind of crimped terminals on the coils, because I needed to lay the harness out multiple times to make sure 100% before I pretty much did this point that everything fits where I wanted it to. There was no wires that were a little shorter or anything like that, because at one point I did feel like they were a little short, but I was able to still pull some through the harness a little bit, give me a little more slack. Everything reaches now. And I should point out, while we still don't have any connectors, and before I did install these boots, I did slide on a lot of extra stuff. So I am reusing, like I said, I couldn't find the grommet. I am reusing the grommet. I slid over, this is a 2-inch heat shrink. It is a 3-to-1 shrink ratio, so it should shrink down enough to about maybe 3/4, it might be closer to 1 inch, to fix or cover up the rip on this. I also put a Surge Motive heat shrink logo on it with clear heat shrink that's going to go over it. The Surge Motive logo, or the Surge Motive heat shrink, is a 1 inch. The clear is 1.5 inches. This is the only thing I could find literally today, because I forgot to order clear heat shrink for this big section, so I had to run out to Napa. All they had was an 1.5 inch clear heat shrink, but it is a 3-to-1 as well, so the 1.5 will definitely shrink down to a 3/4, which will be enough to tidy that up. Those are not getting heated up until the harness is in the car and fully connected. That way I know where I want to position this and where this is going to be positioned. But for right now, or at least for today, I'm going to give these a lot, pretty much like 4 or 5 hours to cool down, and then I'm going to show you guys how to crimp terminals, brand new terminals, onto your wires. And once we crimp all that on, we're going to put connectors on it, and this harness is done. Giving our harness plenty of cooling off time. Everything is good. I'm not worried about leaving any fingerprints on anything like that. We are ready to move on to crimping our new connectors. I picked the I'm gonna show you guys the example on the vehicle speed sensor, pretty much because it is the kind of biggest connector that I could find on this harness to show you exactly how we're gonna crimp and what crimper I'm using, and just I felt like it's gonna be the best example. So again, we're gonna be doing the vehicle speed sensor. Here's what you need. Now, I'm gonna touch the topic about finding all these connectors. It was not easy finding all of these connectors. I will leave some links for the connectors that I found, a lot of other ones that I don't even remember where I found. There was a lot of searching, so whatever link I could leave. I think like Rayspec has a lot of these. You could try like Amazon. I think I got the coil connectors from Amazon. I'll just leave links like that. They're pretty hard to source, so if you don't see a link for a certain connector, I might have just forgot where I got it from. But anyway, when you do get a connector, this is what you get. You get your pins, you get your locking tab, and then you get your weather pack seals for the wires to make sure no water can get into the back. I'm going to set you up on a tripod, and let's show you how we're going to install a brand new connector onto bare wires. So we got our section of wires here, the ones we're going to be doing. I'm going to be using one of these wire strippers. I like this style, although I got this one from Harbor Freight and I had to modify it because I didn't like how far it was allowing the wires to come in. It's supposed to be like a preset so you can strip the right amount each time. I had to modify mine. So first thing, we're just going to strip all these 3 wires. Then when you get your pins, you're going to have to cut them off this little rail. And then next, don't forget to slide on your weather pack seal. And now we're ready to crimp. So the crimpers I'm using, I got these off of Amazon. The brand is IWISS, IWISS. I really like this brand. These are Molex crimpers. I think you can get them for like $25. They have the smaller sizes that we're going to be using because this is, I think, 20 gauge wire, so we do need the smaller sizes. This is how you start. So we're going to pick, it doesn't matter where we're crimping these right now. It matters when we put them into the connector. But for now, let's zoom in and show you guys how we're going to set this up. So we're going to start with this one wire right here. When you look at your weather pack connector or your weather pack seal, you're going to see there's this little lip at the top. This top portion is going to fit inside our little wings right here. This is what they're called, as wings at the bottom. And then the actual copper strands of the wire go inside our terminal right in here, so on top of the wings. So when you put it together, this is kind of how it's going to sit. As you guys see, the wings right here at the bottom are going around the weather pack seal, and then the bare wires go inside the top portion of this. So when you're going to start to crimp this, you always start with the copper strands. Make sure you guys can see that well. Alright, so our strands are in there. We're going to put this into our crimper. I believe I always use this bottom one right here. So I should go over the crimper really quick. So talking about our crimper really quickly before we actually crimp the terminal on. So this Molex crimper is for open barrel terminals, which is what the terminals are right now that we're using. They're open barrel. And this is going to be what they call a B style crimp. B because you can kind of see inside our crimper right here, it kind of looks like a capital B. It's got the line coming in the center right here. Where this line is going to be where the crimper crimps down on this section right here. So as you can see, where the strands would be right inside here, where that line was, the B portion is going to crimp here. And then when we go back to our crimper, you can see the other half of it is kind of like I want to say like a half a circle. So it would be this end right here. There we go, yeah. This end right here is kind of a half circle. The crimp is going to sit like that. So that way when we close it, that's kind of how we're going to sit. You'll get the idea once I crimp it. Now we're just going to set our crimper right in here. And then just come down on it. Give it a good crimp. And yeah, let's get this up here for you guys so you can see. You can see how it crimped it nicely. It's collapsed. Very nice in the center. The crimp or the terminal is not disformed in any way. So that's a solid crimp. We can give it a tug just to be sure. And that's good. And then now we're actually going to crimp the wings onto our terminal right here. And for this I use a different crimper. I use my Weather Pack crimper for that. It kind of has a slot meant for like the wings. So I'll just kind of fit it in right here. Sometimes you got to close them a little bit. We'll just give it a light crimp. You're not crimping it too tight. You're just kind of closing it up a little like that. And then we'll get the camera zoomed in on this one more time. Alright, so there you guys can see the terminal is crimped. Our wings down here are crimped nicely and the terminal never disformed. And then you're going to do this through the whole harness. We have all 3 wires pinned up, ready to go into our connector, and we obviously can't just put it into our connector. So I have my phone right here with my picture showing which color went into where. So for our vehicle speed sensor, if we're looking at the connector from the back, it's usually how I always look at it. So our black wire, solid black, went in the first terminal, so all the way on the left. Now, don't force these in. They're either going to go in or they're not, and you'll hear it when it clicks in. So it looks like, I think I got it on the first shot. So it's going to go, and it clicked right in, and that's it. Our middle wire is the black with a yellow stripe, so it's this one right here. Same thing. I'll be quiet so you can hear it. That clicked in. And then last but not least is going to be our white wire with, it looks like a green. Could be blue, I don't know, they might be faded. We'll tug on it. That's good to go. Now, one last thing. I just actually realized this as I'm doing this right now. I didn't add a piece of heat shrink. What I'm going to do is actually depin this, which should be a good chance to show you guys how to depin. I'm going to depin this, slide a little piece of heat shrink, so that way when I click it back in, the open end of the Raychem right here will actually kind of be closed up with a small piece of heat shrink, and that's it. So depinning, how about we do that? We're going to have to grab some tools. So I actually have tools dedicated to depinning. You don't need these depinning tools on a connector like this where the opening is slightly bigger. You can actually just use a pick, but for me, I'm going to use a tool, and my tool actually has a little kind of like a knife edge to it, and that's for allowing it to slide into Honda connectors. But let's zoom in again. As you can see, our pins are sitting in there. They kind of have a little plastic tab on the top. Let me see. Yeah, so this tab right here lifts up. As you can see, I'm kind of lifting it up right now. These tabs are in almost all Honda connectors. It doesn't have to be the same exact connector, but anytime you're depinning, there's always a tab that locks the pin in there. So sometimes with these, you can actually on these bigger connectors, you don't have to go in and lift the tab. You can actually lift the pin up, and it'll lift the tab, and if you push on the pin, it might go out. So this one isn't. So what we're gonna do is slide this. Well, first we'll grab our wire from the back so we can actually tug on it. Okay. We're gonna go in. We're gonna lift our tab up, and then we're gonna pull the pin. All right. So this one was fighting me a little bit, but I finally got it. Lifting it up and then pushing it. So once we lift that tab out, we'll come and we'll pull our pin out. So let's see if we can get this other one going, because it goes to show you they locked in here pretty good. There we go. So then that, and then we'll do one more. Okay. There's that one. So now we'll grab our heat shrink, slide it over, and then we'll do this process one more time. We have our heat shrink slid on. Last thing you got to do is install your locking. I don't want to say it's a tab, but it's a little lock clip. These, same thing, they only go on one way, so don't force it on. If it doesn't go on, it's probably not on the right way, so that doesn't feel right. So we'll just spin it around. Oh, actually the other way was right. And then that's it. Now this connector is done. I'm going to put this heat shrink right about there, and then this is all good to go. So I'll heat this up real quick. And that's your finished connector end right there. So I'm going to go through the rest of the harness. It's the same exact thing. And when we're done doing all this, we can put this down on the engine. Start connecting it all through our engine bay. It took us a while to finally get here, but we're done. We're finally done. Every connector has been put onto this harness. The shrink wrap, or the heat shrink, has been recovered. I heated it all up. Pretty much put the harness back into the engine bay so I could line up where I wanted all these. And again, I really tried to save this. It's not the greatest. I'm not in love with it, but it's going to do for now. So the heat shrink was able to kind of make it look nice here. I put some zip ties here. Put some zip ties on this because this clear it's just a little too big. I wish I would have just waited and bought the correct size because it didn't shrink down as much as I needed it to, but it's going to work. It's my personal harness, so I'll live with it. There are some flaws in it, honestly, that I might end up redoing on a brand new harness later on down the road. But for now, this is way better than what was on it. Some of the flaws are pretty much just my coils. They're way too short. I don't really like the way they look. I'm just trying to be transparent with you guys. So later on, whenever I make a new harness, I'll probably make these a little longer so they don't fit as tight. Obviously, this is driving me crazy, and just making sure I get the proper heat shrink to do it all. But for the most part, I'm very happy with how it looks. Again, it's way better than what it was. So we're gonna, the important part now, we're gonna lay it all back in the car, plug everything into the ECU, plug everything in, and pretty much finalize this. So I did put zip ties all around, so like this transition under the manifold, I got a zip tie here. I zip tie all the injector wires together, so these are bunched up on their own. Then these zip ties here on the heat shrink. I did all of that kind of pre-mocked up, but now we're gonna lay it all out and zip tie anything else that I don't want. The valve cover ground, I do want to talk about that. Usually there's a ground that goes up and it bolts to like the valve cover right there. It's this guy right here. Where I'm going to end up putting it is I don't want it on the valve cover. Kind of did all this work to tuck the harness a little bit more. So where it's going to end up going now, it's going to go, because it routes underneath here, the ground wire is going to come up here. We're going to ground it right here on the side of the timing cover. So you'll see that when it's all laid out. Just like that, it is all plugged in. I'm super happy with how tight everything looks now. I'll give you guys a better walk around of the harness after we find out if it starts. No excuses. This car hasn't started in like 2 or 3 months. So even if it does start, it might be super rough. Only thing I'm concerned about is as long as there's no check engine lights inside the dash, I know everything is fine. It's just a really cold start because today is like not even mid-January. I think it's like January 29th or something like that. Like we just had a snowstorm in Jersey, so it's already super cold. So tripod, turn the key, cross our fingers, hope it's done. Hopefully you can hear me. Very, very cold. But the good news, no check engine lights. I call that success.
car kicked right over. Kind of surprised. Honestly, I thought it was going to take a little bit for it to kick right over, but I mean, great tune from Yo Solo. Shout out to Yo Solo. The thing is still rocking great, even in this like 19-degree weather. But yeah, everything worked out fine. The new way of like putting multiple wires together for the junction block instead of running every single wire individually, that seemed to work great. So if you guys want to do that, you don't have to run every single wire individually. If you want to relocate that that junction block, excuse me, find where they find the matching color wires. So like black with white, all the black with whites, you can butt them together and run them out of like one single wire. So you can put like I think it's 20 gauge. You could put the 4 20 gauge wires together, make them come out of like a 16 gauge wire or a 14 gauge wire, because you're gonna have to go thicker since you're putting 4 into 1. You could do that with I think it was yellow and brown and then yellow and black. I can't remember right now. This was a while ago since I filmed that part of the clip. But for you guys, it's all one clip. So that works great, and I'll show you the routing. So here, as you can see, coming out from over the valve cover, I just put that cover on because I hate looking at those coils. Comes right down, goes to our cam sensors, goes down to our VSS, engine coolant temp sensor, down to our reverse lights, reverse lockout. Then it'll branch under the manifold. You can kind of see it. Like I said, I got it really tight underneath the manifold. And then from the manifold, you saw it was always a straight section. So we'll go to a straight section from here, then up. We had our 4 injector wires. Then we had our map. You can kind of see them, our map, our TPS, our IAT. That's all kind of underneath these 3 wires that go in this way. I also had the starter hook up here. I kind of made a bracket so you can kind of see those 2 big gray connectors. The one on the left is the starter, the one on the right is the hookup for the alternator charge harness. So from that would feed the alternator, the knock sensor, and then the starter signal wire. And then on the back, let me see if I can try to get you a light. So here on the back we have our VTC sensor, VTEC. I consider it a VTEC pressure, but I don't know what other people call it. Then lower is right in front of the filter, our oil pressure, or original OEM oil pressure sending unit. And then all the way at the bottom will be the crank sensor. Obviously we have the logo here. You can see the Y breakout that we used. That was actually perfect. It looks nice there. Very short path into the firewall. And I'm super happy with how this came out. You know, there's a few things, like I said, I would have changed, but overall, super happy with this. So as you saw, this could be done in your garage. I gave you the knowledge. I gave you the tool. Well, I didn't give them to you. I'm going to tell you where you can find the tools. I'll leave links for as much as I can leave. And you guys can do this too. Like, it takes a long time. It took a lot longer than it needed to. This, in reality, from when I started this to today, I think it's been like 2 months. I swear to God, it's been like 2 months. Just been doing the surge motive thing, all the charge harnesses and stuff that I'm doing for the business, working a full-time job, and then whenever I had a chance in between all that, I'd work on this. And yeah, so you guys can do this in your garage. Definitely leave me a big thumbs up for this video. There's no other video showing you how to completely do overhaul an engine harness. Leave a like on the video, comment, subscribe if you're new, and let's get back to the heavy how-to videos, because that's what you guys know me for. I'll catch you in the next one. Stay motivated and keep making those streets louder.